Hi BookTube, it is day 3 of the reading rush and I am selecting my read for today. I did indeed finish the Moon and the Sixpence. Moon and Sixpence. The Moon and Sixpence, not the Moon and the Sixpence. I don't need to be adding an extra the in there. It seems that I have a couple times. But, so the choice here, really, is between 15 Dogs and Life and Letters of Gustave Flaubert. I'm not really in the mood for Lisa of Lambeth today, and Colonel Chabray is a novel that I need to read in one spot. And so I'm probably going to save Colonel Chabray for the weekend or for an evening. But I think what interests me most today is the Life and Letters of Gustave Flaubert, which is the largest book on my TBR for the reading rush. And so this is definitely not a single day read. It will probably take me 2 or 3 days to read through this, so I may as well do it early while I'm feeling fresh. I'm going to make a cup of coffee and then I'm going to head off to work. I think I've got some yogurt in there. That'll make a good breakfast, and maybe some toast. We'll see. So I'm thinking some more about the book that I finished last night, The Moon and Sixpence. And overall, it was just a very depressing read. The end of W. Somerset Maugham's novels aren't quite usually, they aren't quite that depressing usually. I don't know whether it was, a stylistic thing. As he was aging, he decided to be more pessimistic with his novels, or whether it was due entirely to the subject matter. And he decided that because the artist that he was very loosely basing this story off of, Gauguin, died in Tahiti, that he had to come up with an equally tragic end for Charles Strickland in this novel. And I won't give away exactly what his tragic end is, but it is quite a depressing novel. So I'm going to put The Moon and Sixpence on play. I found it here on YouTube. I'm hoping this is the one that I want, from the 1940s. Because I finished the book yesterday, and so now I want to watch the film.
Goodbye, dear. I'm sorry I broke down. I'm glad you didn't go away.
I can't tell you how sorry I am about all this, but why on earth should you want me to go to Paris?
Fred isn't the man to go. He'll only make things worse. I don't know who else to ask.
I've not spoken more than 10 words to you.
Maybe it's just me, but she isn't a very good actress, whoever she is. So earlier today, I did get about 60 pages into the Flaubert biography. Now, it's a little bit different than what you would expect from a more contemporary biography. The author is very concerned about not sharing too much private information from the letters that he draws on, and is also concerned for some reason about protecting identities. For instance, he is sharing some of the letters that Flaubert wrote to a woman he was in love with. And the author hasn't told us her name. The author clearly knows who she was because he was able to access the letters that she received, but he just refers to her as the lady or the lady in question, which is a very odd way of going about writing a biography, to just leave out people's names. And so he goes about identifying some of the people that Flaubert had interactions with in a very vague way. And I keep meaning to Google the Roman numerals on the publication page of this book, just to determine when it was actually published. And I'll do that in a little bit. But I wanted to read to you the preface that the author begins this biography with. He says, "My aim in the following pages has been to place the personality of Gustave Flaubert vividly before my readers. It was through his letters rather than through his works that I became interested in him, and my original intention was to make a volume of translations of selected letters, so that others might be impressed in the same way as myself. I found, however, that without continual references to his works, not all of which are translated into English, his letters would be unintelligible, and so gradually the book assumed its present form. I have done my best to avoid mere gossip about his private life, holding with him that an artist's privacy should be respected, and esteeming this to be, above all, a sound maxim, when so many personal acquaintances are still alive, as in the present case." So that explains why the author chose to vaguely refer to some of the people, also to the lady, whoever she is. I'm sure if I Googled it now, I could find out who the lady was. But it's just an interesting ethical choice, I suppose. I can't imagine anyone choosing to do this nowadays. In a biography nowadays, everyone is, when they write a biography, they're all about every little tidbit, every little hearsay. And the author here is clearly trying to respect the people that Flaubert knew. And so the author goes on, "Thus I did not look for facts which have not already appeared in print. My chief authorities are the author's own works and letters, but I have made use of the introduction written by Madame Comenville to the first volume of her uncle's letters, also of the critical and personal notice written by Guy de Maupassant, and printed with the volume of letters addressed to George Sand." And the author goes on about who he is indebted to. But I think it's just an interesting approach to a biography. So I'm enjoying it so far. It is interesting to read all the letters, but because it focuses so much on the letters, at times the author is just quoting big chunks of letters and then providing some context. And so it's not the traditional experience of reading a biography. It's like I'm half reading a biography and half like I'm reading a collection of published letters, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It just sort of throws you for a loop as you're reading. So here is an interesting fact on page 5 that I just flipped to. Up to the age of 9, Gustavus had not learned to read, while his sister easily acquired the art. On page 7, his taste for literature was indirectly encouraged by his parents, who allowed the children and their friends to make a stage of the billiard table and declaim tragedies and comedies from that elevation to an audience such as the household could supply, with the addition of one or two sympathetic friends. There are some letters here from what the author refers to as a passionate friendship. So
someone that he met as a boy and continued to correspond with on and off into his adult years. Before he was 17, Flaubert was reading Victor Hugo, Byron, Shakespeare, Rabelais, Montaigne, and early acquired the conviction that there was no such thing as indecency in true literature. And I think it speaks to perhaps the time and the perspective from which his author is writing. But they seem to hint that perhaps these are not appropriate works for a teenager, for a young boy, which is an interesting perspective. Almost as though the author thought he was reading above his understanding of life. The lady in question, who I was talking of, the author indicates that this is the sort of template, the model for Madame Renaud in Sentimental Education, which is my favorite work by Flaubert. I prefer that one to Madame Bovary. So I am 75 pages in here, and I'm just checking my notes here because I think there was one more passage I wanted to share. I've been storing up these thoughts all day because I didn't have a chance to slip away and film a bit. After I left work, I went to the Rideau Center to go to the Farm Boy there and get some groceries. And I got some dinner there from the hot food bar because I was just so hungry. And then I boarded the bus to come back home, and because of traffic and construction and emergency vehicles and whatnot, it inexplicably took what would normally be a 20-minute trip. It took me literally an hour to get home, and you could just tell the atmosphere on the bus. People were really pissed off, and there was this guy who was taking up 2 seats because he had a whole bunch of grocery bags with him, and the bus was packed, like standing room only. And then this older gentleman gets on and got in a bit of an altercation with the guy taking up 2 seats, and they started telling each other to go to hell. And some woman got up and offered the man who was standing and who was calling the guy sitting down an asshole. She offered him her seat, and then he wouldn't take it because his problem really wasn't that he wanted to sit. His problem was that there was someone not following the etiquette of riding a bus. And so he felt he had to confront him for that. And for a moment, like, they were pushing and shoving each other, and the bus driver didn't seem to notice, but for a moment I thought they were going to get into an all-out fist fight, and that would have lengthened the commute even more. But I couldn't really read on the bus, which kind of sucked because I was sitting there for an hour doing nothing because I had my grocery bags in my lap. And although I did have a seat, I couldn't balance my bags while balancing such a heavy book on my lap. So I sat there and stewed and stared into space. But there's a passage here on page 29 where he talks about meeting Victor Hugo. So this is a quote from one of his letters. "You are expecting details about Victor Hugo. What do you want me to say about him? He is a man like anybody else, with a fairly ugly face and a common exterior. He has splendid teeth, a fine forehead, no eyelashes nor eyebrows. He speaks little, has the air of watching himself, and wishing not to let anything escape from him. He is very polished and a little affected. I am very much pleased with the sound of his voice. I took pleasure in contemplating him at close quarters. I looked at him with astonishment, as at a casket in which there might be millions and crown diamonds, thinking of all that had come out of this man seated beside me on a low chair, fastening his eyes on his right hand, which has written so many fine things. This, however, was the man who has made up my heartbeat the most since I was born, and whom perhaps I love the best of all those that I do not know. The talk was of punishments, vengeance, thieves, etc., etc. The great man and I did most of the talking. I do not remember whether I said anything good or bad, but I know I said plenty of them. As you see, I go fairly often to the Praters. It is a house that I like very much, and where there is no ceremony, and which is altogether in my style." So even as a young man, Flaubert was rubbing shoulders with some of the literary gods of his day. And his parents sent him off to law school, and he went and failed the oral exam, and thereafter he decided to devote his life to literature, to writing. And I guess it did help, so to speak. His parents let him off the hook in terms of law school, as he suffered from some form of epilepsy in his younger years. And oops, I just clipped something on my laptop, and all of a sudden Haley Kiyoko is playing. Great song, I Wish, just came out a few days ago, but that is not the topic of this video. The topic is Flaubert. And as I was saying, Flaubert suffered from some form of epilepsy. I forget exactly what the author does say here, but he suffered from it in his younger days, and then for a good portion of his life it didn't cause him any issues until he got a little bit older and the symptoms returned. And the author, you can tell the times to a publication, because the author spends a few paragraphs explaining that epilepsy has nothing to do with low intelligence or with low mental ability, which I guess must have been a misconception at some point. But I really should just take a minute here and Google to see exactly when this biography was published, because the Roman numeral date is right in the front, and I should have done that before I even started reading. Okay, so I did just go ahead and Google the year. In the Roman numeral format, it's MDCCCXCV, which is apparently 1895. So this book was published in 1895, and I wouldn't doubt if this is the actual 1895 edition, because the paper quality indicates that the printing, the text on the page indicates that it was published by D. Appleton and Company in New York. And it is a library discard, which would explain its good condition. The paper is quite thick, which is interesting, and the print on the page, the only way to describe it is that it feels textured. I can feel the letters as if they're slightly raised on the page, which I assume has to do with how the book was printed. But I don't think I've ever read a biography that was published as far back as 1895, and that also explains why the author gives Flaubert the treatment that he does, because Flaubert was still a relatively recently deceased author. And don't mind me, I'm just Googling here when Flaubert died. So he died in 1880 at the age of 58. So this was published just 15 years after the death of Flaubert. And so, of course, since he died at a rather young age, as the author Charles Tarver mentions, many of the people that he would have been writing to, or at least some of them, still would have been alive at the time of publication. So a very interesting book so far. I don't think I'm going to read much farther tonight. I have to admit I am quite tired. So I'm going to call it a night for reading, and I think I'll shower and climb into bed and maybe watch some Netflix. I've been working my way through the new season of Queer Eye. Season 4 of Queer Eye is up on Netflix, and I love that show, so that's going to be the rest of my evening. I will see you again tomorrow for the 4th day of Reading Rush, where I will continue on with Life and Letters of Gustave Flaubert. And I don't think I asked in either of my vlogs, but in the comment section below, let me know how your own reading rush is going. Have you made progress? Have you finished any books? I know there's official challenges you can do. If you're doing any of those challenge videos, let me know in the comments below so I can go and check out your challenges or your daily vlogs if you're doing them. I admit I'm not that interested in the challenges. I think the one for yesterday was like 2 truths and a dare, not a dare, 2 truths and a lie. Different game entirely. 2 truths and a lie, which I mean, it's interesting, but I didn't really feel like doing that. And I think the one for today was to cook a meal from a book. Once again, didn't really feel like doing that. If you want to get technical, I had a glass of milk earlier and I had some bread today. And so I've just had the meal that Charles Strickland had in the Moon and Sixpence when he was starving to death. But I ate a lot of other things too. And, you know, if I had an egg this morning with my breakfast and an egg, I just had, if I'm eating an egg, then I guess I'm having one of Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir's dinners. It's relatively easy to eat something from a literary text, from a novel, or from a biography, if you will. So let me know how your reading rush is going in the comments, and I will see you tomorrow.